Hello and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live program as we explore supply chain best practices and today in returnable asset tracking. We're talking about how to keep track of those specialized shipping assets and getting more out of your supply chain. Brought as always to you by my friends at the Antares Vision Group, the real experts in supply chain and technology. Hello everyone again, I'm your host, Bill Wall, and I've worked in the enterprise software and data space for more than 20 years, ever fascinated by the intersection of business and technology. No matter what industry you work in, managing materials and the carriers that transport materials is mission critical for supply chain managers. I've been fortunate to cover the latest in technology developments to address these critical issues out at the edge and into the core ERP solutions, and it continues to amaze me how best practices in supply chain can be addressed across industries. Today, we're going to dig into proven strategies to optimize returnable asset inventory and track those items along the supply chain and get the real benefit of having a customer with us today who is doing so right here on our program. Now, our conversation is an interactive one, so welcome to everyone who's joining. I encourage you in the audience to participate. Use our webinar platform to do a couple of things. Give us your name, title, and where you're located so we get a sense of the audience and we can adapt the program to that. And you can use that same comments area to throw out a question for our visiting customer and our supply chain expert, and we'll try to address them during the course of our time together. My most productive conversations have been with my friends at Axis, now a part of the Antares Vision Group. So it's my pleasure to welcome a regular guest of mine, Chief Strategy Officer John DiPaolo, to the program. John, good to have you along.
Bill, it's good to be talking with you once again. I'm excited about this subject today.
It's even better because people are tired of hearing just you and I talk. So we're really lucky to have a customer on, a special guest, the Global Packaging Manager for Kuraray, America's Advanced Interlayer Solutions Division, Brian Webster. Brian, great to have you with us today.
Great to be here, Bill.
Always excited to have a customer's perspective. So before we jump into the program, let's just talk a little bit first about Kuraray. That was a company I had to learn about. It's not a common name. What is the business and what are the products we're talking about?
So Kuraray is a global company headquartered in Japan. We do a whole bunch of things. We're in just about everything, but the division I work for, the AIS division, we make interlayers. Our customers, we make glass interlayers for the architectural industry and the automotive industry.
So if we think about that, if I take just my naive, don't know too much about it perspective, these are the materials, films, if you were, between layers of glass that provides stability, strength. What do these pieces of film do?
That's correct. Also acoustic. Basically, it's the interlayer that we extrude that gets laminated by our customers between two pieces of glass that keeps it from breaking into a million pieces.
Okay, very cool. Always something different on this program, John. Let's start with the basics. John, at its core, the discussion really is about how to manage returnable assets. So when you think about that as a business challenge, talking to customers like Brian, what are the aspects of returnable assets that we tend to focus on?
Yeah, so as we move to a more circular economy, what we're starting to see are more and more companies wanting to ship either product or assets or other items in containers that can be reused, right? So these are items that go out and then the containers come back. And the reason for that, is there's multiple reasons, but you get better, the product is better protected. You can leverage the reuse of these containers multiple times across their lifespan. Environmentally, it's more friendly. So there's a bunch of reasons for utilizing returnable assets within your supply chain. The challenge is that oftentimes what we see across our customer base is either the inability to get them back in a timely manner or damage, when they're out in the field and come back and the returnable asset is damaged or it needs to be repaired or is not usable. Or they get lost, right? So those are some of the initial challenges. And then other challenges that we see that we want to overcome is once you have a fleet of returnable assets within your supply chain, you want to make sure they're in the right place at the right time so that you can manufacture things properly, you can ship things out on time to customers, and you don't have too many because that's a cost to the business that's unnecessary. And you don't have too few, because in many cases, what we see is that if you don't have the asset you're going to ship in, customers really only have two alternatives. One is to stop production and not produce product.
Right.
And the other is to ship in some sort of one-way asset that then has to be dealt with by the customer. And nobody's happy about that because, again, it's added cost, added labor, and again, an environmental impact that we need to deal with. So those are the challenges that we see. And, the solutions that we put in place really are built to address all of those challenges and really allow you to maximize the use of your returnable fleet.
So Brian, John and I have had a number of these conversations about returnable assets, and it's been kind of fascinating because some of these carriers, if you will, can be very expensive and highly complex. We did a session recently about very large wooden reels that are for transporting cable. Like just the cost of the reels, the weight of them, the time that they sit and lay down yards and storage was kind of fascinating. So you talked a little bit about interlayers. These are materials that are in rolls, or are they rigid and flat? What do these carriers for your business look like?
Yeah, so we manufacture our interlayers in both roll form and in sheet form. Some of the thicker stuff has to go in sheet form because once you get to a certain caliper, you can't roll it up. So if you think about a window in a skyscraper, how big that is, if we're manufacturing that in a sheet, imagine the size of the pallet that needs to go on, just to give folks a feel for how big these things are. The rolls are a bit easier, but they're pretty big too, pretty wide, and they're made of steel. They have to be robust.
I know we're always thrilled when we get a customer on a program, and there's always this balance between sharing with the audience details and maintaining your proprietary trade secrets. Can you give us a sense of what are the weights of these shipping containers so the audience has a sense of what you're dealing with? And can you put a rough value on what a container is worth?
Sure. High hundreds to a few thousand pounds for the big steel pallets that I just mentioned for the sheet. And what was the other question? Weight and cost. So high hundreds into the thousands there as well.
So if you spread that out across the number of carriers you're managing, that's a significant number for the business. John mentioned the upsides and downsides of returnables versus one way. Certainly at your manufacturers where your materials are going to, if they had to dispose of all of these containers, that's a cost in trash and space and time. So the value for you is to avoid that headache for the customer and have to not rebuild these over and over again. But anybody who's not in your space would say, well, every building is different. Do these packages wind up being customized for each client, or do you generally have the ability to sort of standardize on certain types of carriers for rolled or flat material?
Yeah, so we have about 5 or 6 solutions. I believe it's 5 at this point on the crates, and then the one solution that's in development. So it's pretty standardized, I would say. That could change, but right now that's the current offering that we have in returnables here in the U.S.
I know you're well along on this project and really starting to get a sense of it. Take us back to where you were before. Were these assets largely manually tracked? Somebody was keeping a spreadsheet and account? What's the sort of before and after?
Yeah, so we have had for some time now visibility in SAP once the assets come into our facility. They were, and hopefully that'll change here within the next few weeks, entered manually into SAP. We see them flow, through the manufacturing process, but once they go out to the door to our customers, they just go into a black hole, or until recently, went into a black hole until they came back and we wrote them back on.
If I understand your business, you're sending your materials to another party who ultimately will get them to, in the example you gave, a window manufacturing company, which will then apply them downstream. Are you tracking it every step of the way, or is your concern likely, I want to know when it's off my dock and when it returns to my dock?
So we have great partnerships with our customers. We work very closely with them. Most of them are rather large customers. So really what was important to us and is important to us is when they go to that customer, how long do they sit there? We get into dwell time and things of that nature that were very important to us. But really what's most important is where did they go and when did they come back?
John, in a previous program, I'll go back to the cable reel example. We talked about tracking them all the way out to laydown yards where the material might sit before it's used for a while and then may sit for an extended period before it's returned. Are you seeing customers that are more like Brian, I just want to know when it leaves and when it comes back? Or are you also seeing customers that are tracking returnable assets at every step of the supply chain?
I think it's an evolving process, Bill. So what we primarily see right now is a check-in, check-out process, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I have an asset, it is going somewhere. One of the things that we do and can do is determine transit time, for the asset itself. We can do some level of carrier integration as well, so that we know kind of where the asset is or as it moves through the supply chain. We have had customers who want to focus more on what I would call an electronic Kanban, where they receive the asset and that triggers, an event in the customer or in the supplier that says, okay, let me prepare a new shipment because I know that's going to be consumed. So these are follow-on activities that people can think about as to how do you involve that level of visibility with your partners so that you have a better handle of usage of product and really what I like to think about is how can I use the returnable asset as a proxy for the product,
right?
So that when it gets seen at various points within the supply chain, that means something to me. So it means a reorder point. It means I can expect that asset back in a period of time. All of these different touch points that are out there can be leveraged into getting better visibility as to what's going on through your supply chain.
I have a sense that probably can make a good bet that an awful lot of people listening today are not in the raw materials for window or glass manufacturing products. But Brian, we've had people on that are transporting pharmaceuticals or food, which of course are highly regulated kinds of products. We talked about the cable reels. John and I talked many sessions ago about car parts that are going back and forth in carriers for just-in-time inventories. But John, I think for our audience, they may not be in Brian's business, but a lot of the lessons learned about returnable asset tracking are applicable across industry, right? What are some of the things that are pretty much common across industry?
Yeah, I think that when you sit down and start to boil down the lessons that people can learn about this type of management, I really think about fleet sizing as being a very important aspect of this, right? Returnables at any aspect are typically expensive. They're more expensive than one-way packaging in most cases. You want to have the right number. Balance of the fleet, right? Making sure that you have the assets in the right place, I think is pretty ubiquitous across all industries. And really the other thing which I think, is certainly very important, to Kuraray, but also to others is, in a returnable scenario, your product tends to be protected much better. So your quality of delivery, is, very important to all businesses. And with a properly designed returnable asset, one of the things that you can be assured of is that when you pack it into a truck, it packs the same way every time. When you deliver it, it's probably going to be protected better than in a one-way, shipment. And it just is a better way of moving a lot of product through the supply chain once you get the network in place.
Brian, I know listeners love the details. So let's talk about one detail, which is how you track these products. We've discussed on this program multiple times the use of a variety of technologies. You mentioned too, GPS, RFID, obviously. There are barcode scanners that can be applied. So your packaging is kind of interesting and unique. What's the tagging mechanism that you chose and why?
Yeah, so we did explore, we ended up going with RFID. We did explore other options, GPS being one of them. And one of the biggest challenges that we saw with GPS is those tags require batteries that need to be charged. So it was a whole separate process outside of just the tagging of the assets and the tracking of them that we would need to manage. And quite honestly, managing that fleet, as is difficult enough. So again, a lot of the GPS, the tags were more fancy, had a lot of bells and whistles, but it didn't make sense for us. So we worked with Axis, as the expert in the field. RFID is tried and true. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. And we went with RFID tags. Now, the fact that the assets are steel causes a problem because there's some interference there. You can't just put a little RFID tag like you would have in the tag on your shirt. You need something more robust. So this visual here, I think, illustrates pretty well the different tags that we explored. The small tag didn't work. The next size up worked okay, but not so great. The one that's circled in red there is the tag that we chose, and the one on top, I think it was Peter with Axis, told us that they use that on Army tanks. So we didn't quite need to go to that level. But with the tags we chose, we're getting really good reads on things, and this is the solution that made sense for us.
And so you're scanning those tags in the warehouse at the loading dock for departure and return. How are you doing the scan? Is that a manual scan at the truck back, or have you put readers up around the building?
So we ended up going with overhead readers. We explored different options there as well. One of our other sites uses some RFID tracking, and they had readers, as you can see from this image here. They were smaller. They're on tripods on either side of the door. But we were excited when we realized and learned from Axis that we could go with overhead. They don't take up space. Again, they're a little bigger, and I believe going the route we went, and it may have been a little bit of overkill here, but we wanted to err on the side of caution and ensure that we were getting good reads, and that's exactly what we got from these readers.
So you talked a little bit about the fact that products will essentially go out, and then I'll use my words, you've lost track of them. You don't care at that point because you know directionally where they're going. This is really an exercise to understand where they are in the process and to keep an eye on when they leave and when they return to you. What's in the decision at your end about reading at various stops along the way, and what was the analysis about? It's actually good enough just for us to know they've left our building and they've returned to our building.
Well, I think reading at various steps of the way really gets into the opportunity that we had to integrate with SAP, and we just showed the image of those readers. One of the questions that was asked of us is, where do you want readers? Do you want them at your warehouse? Do you want them at the customers? Do you want to know when the customers get there? And this was in the design phase of the project.
Right.
And what we realized was through the integration in SAP, what we ended up doing was basically linking the batch to the asset. When the roll or the sheet goes into the asset, it gets linked at that point in time. So the readers are there at our warehouse. When they go into production, all of the movements that already exist in SAP, once the batch is linked to the asset, tells it where it goes from there. Yeah. So what that did, and it was huge, was it enabled us to only have readers at our facility. So we didn't have to work with our many customers to get readers in place there. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, I think you did great, Brian. Thanks. John, when we think about customers generally, what are some of those decision points about the type of technology, whether it's RFID, GPS, or just simple barcodes? What are the customers thinking about in the design phase on that perspective?
Yeah, and our counsel really on that is twofold. So the beauty of the solution that we put in here and that we use in most locations is we take a multimodal approach, right? So there is barcode available as well that represents the RFID tag. So regardless of whether you're RFID enabled or barcode enabled or line of sight enabled, you can track that particular asset anywhere through the supply chain. So if we wanted to involve a customer, as an example, through a mobile app that we have available, they could just scan the barcode and in essence be able to receive it without having the infrastructure in place. And, Brian brought up an interesting point around the benefits of a fully integrated system, right? Because now, because we have tied the returnable asset plus the batch that is being tracked in SAP all together, that entire package and all of the context data that goes with that is now available to all stakeholders within the supply chain, that have access to the solution. And it really makes for a highly valuable solution when you start to think about things in that manner. So it's data access plus the context data that goes along with that really provides a significant benefit.
So if I push on that a little bit, the downstream customer, and in Brian's example of the skyscraper who's building the windows, or ultimately the general manager on the project, they don't just have to trust that the stuff is in process. They actually can be shown that that batch is moving, and the reader helps do that. And that's a little bit, John, the secret sauce of the returnable asset effort, right? Because we learn a lot about the assets and how to maintain the inventory of them and everything that goes with that business case. But the process of tracking returnable assets also provides another layer of depth of information about the supply chain itself. So this is really more data from the edge that is a positive outcome of the investment on protecting returnable assets. That's the way to think about it, right?
Correct. I mean, you're really looking at, how can I provide a high fidelity view of the supply chain, right? Mm-hmm. And because that asset has knowledge about itself, right? It has knowledge about what's been put in it for that journey. Anytime that I read that asset, it provides me additional data points on, how long it's been out, where it is it in the right place? Is it in the wrong place? And, as we start to see for this particular product, as an example, we are also starting to see more and more technology being implemented at construction sites, just as an example. So you could very easily start to track the entrance of that returnable asset into a construction site, the consuming of it, and then the product coming back. So, as this technology becomes more ubiquitous, the value of having not only the asset tag, but the context data behind it and the back-end integration into SAP really becomes beneficial.
I want to take that a little bit further because we've got the benefit of having Brian with us. Any IT project, Brian, in all my years in this business, has to be justified as a business investment. And the return on that investment becomes really important. If we just think about returnable assets, you think about the value of this project as a way to be paid off because your investment in those assets is so significant. So as you look at it, do you think about the business case in, okay, if I can track this asset 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, by the time I get to that 3rd or 4th or 5th cycle, I've paid off the IT investment just in knowing where my assets are and reducing loss and building in efficiencies and so forth. Is that the calculus behind the investment on a project like this for your company?
Well, it's close, I think, and the number of turns you mentioned is very close for the asset itself to pay itself off, because not only are the returnable assets expensive, but the single-use solutions that we replace them with are also expensive. So there's payoff there. But as far as the value of the system in protecting those assets and helping us manage those assets, John touched on it. For us, it's really the fleet sizing.
Right.
It's really tough to tell how many assets you need to support a given amount of demand if you don't know how many assets you have. So we talk about that black hole,
right?
and when they go out, and we can estimate it, and we've done tribute to the team, we've done a pretty good job of doing that without RFID tracking. But now that we're starting to get useful information out of the system, we're learning things, and we're learning things fast, and we're able to better make those decisions when we go to make that investment. So do we really need to buy 2,000 more of these assets, or would 1,000 be sufficient if we can better manage things?
So I got to ask, without giving away the details, how do you feel about that? You guys made good estimates because obviously you're smart at running your business, but now you're actually tracking them. Did your initial assessments of how big your fleet needed to be pretty much get justified by the project, or are you learning that you could be even more efficient?
Well, I think we're in a good place. We're very early in this process. And I think what Asset Track is really going to do is give us a chance to tighten things up better. And again, this is, you know, this is all very new to us, and the information we're gathering at this point is leading to discussions among the team that we didn't have previously. You talk about a manual process and how we manage things. Since we were making a bunch of assumptions, really the way we determined until recently how we purchase more assets is what are we running out of?
Right.
And that's obviously, you know, not the best way to make those decisions. So yes, I think, you know, everyone on our end is very happy with the investment we've made to this point, and yeah, we're excited about things to come, and just being more effective in everything we do as it relates to these assets, the purchase of them, the maintenance of them. We get into attributes. We came across an asset a few weeks ago from 1996. So these things, you know, can last 25, 30 years, which is insane. Imagine, you know, what we can do if we can better manage them.
It reminds me, Brian, of a story when I first started at SAP forever ago, so many years, we're not going to mention it on this program, but I got a chance to go out and meet a bunch of customers who were using SAP, and I met a woman who was in charge of managing the assets of an electric utility. And the largest category of one particular asset was telephone poles. You can imagine if you're in the electric utility business, you got a lot of poles in the ground. And she managed a six-figure, several 100,000 poles on a spreadsheet, one at a time. And so clearly this becomes really, really important when you start talking about very valuable assets and moving through the system. How do you, as a supply chain manager, monitor the day-to-day? Have you set up a dashboard that allows you to just get a look at it? And how do you think about it in terms of the KPIs that matter to you the most?
Yeah, we have. So, you know, similar to your example, until previously, everything was done on a spreadsheet, known facts. We would take a snapshot basically, and then make some assumptions to get to that number. So we started this tagging process several months ago now, and we got to the point where we're like, okay, well, most of the assets should have made it through the system. We assumed we had about 3,500 assets, and 2 weeks ago, no, at the start of last week, we took a look and we only saw 2,500 in the system. So, you know, the assumption among the team was perhaps we were way off. So when we looked at it, what we realized was we had instructed the warehouse, our third-party warehouse on board, to tag the assets as they came back from the customers, which is exactly what they were doing. And having assumed they would have been through the loop already, what we realized through the discussion from the data that we saw in the system was there were other assets that weren't necessarily in the loop that hadn't been tagged. So that was maybe Monday of last week. Once we had that discussion, the team over there was a relatively small team, so I think it really speaks to the quality of the work that they do over there at Onboard Warehouse. When we went and checked this Monday, there were almost another 5,000 assets in the system already, and the belief is that maybe there are another 500 there. So what that did was again, it prompted the discussion. We had the discussion, we put a countermeasure in place, and we've seen quick action on that. So really, we think we're going to get to that number of about 3,500. But the other discussion it prompted is, how are we managing these assets as they come in? Is it first in, first out, or is it the assets that are closest, you know, to where we need them? So we're going to make some changes there as well, and that may improve, you know, how quickly these things go through the loop. And what it'll also do is sort of spread out the wear and tear on those assets so that they're being used at equal intervals, and, you know, assets aren't just sitting there, you know, while the other assets are out taking the brunt of the wear and tear that happens when they're out on the road. I should
tell those that have tuned in today, because it's great to get a peek at a customer dashboard, that Brian did a good job of graying out the locations and names of customers and so forth. We love getting this kind of on-hand customer input, but we're always want to help and assist in making sure we don't give away some of the business secrets. So Brian, thanks for sharing that dashboard. If you think about the overall projects, you're sort of looking at the day-to-day, but what are the big KPIs that matter to you the most? You mentioned earlier, really right-sizing your fleet for the needs of the business. Is that the big business driver for you among all other things?
That is, yeah. Again, the lead time, dwell time, number of assets, date of manufacture of the asset itself. And again, we talked about the material that goes into it. We have the date of manufacture on the material as well. But until we started getting the attributes and the potential that's there through Asset Track, we didn't have a record of the manufacturing date other than going out on the floor and laying eyes on it.
Right.
So on the maintenance side, that's huge. You
mentioned that a big portion of your business today and the focus of this project is domestic, but you talked about your business as a Japanese company and international business. Does international scoping for this project a downstream phase for you?
For sure. We have a solution that we started to roll out at our site over in Troisdorf, Germany, and things are moving pretty slow there. But we believe it makes sense there. Our site in Ulsan, South Korea, space is more of an issue, but obviously the need is there as well. We see the need for returnable assets across the globe for sustainability reasons. And again, there are some pretty big cost drivers from a business perspective, but yes, it makes sense. RFID can work anywhere, and that's the technology that we're exploring in other regions and seeing how Access can support us in that.
Brian, we always tend to wrap up these programs, John and I, and talk a little bit about lessons learned. And as you think about it from the customer's perspective, leading this project, what advice do you give to people that are listening today that are considering a returnable assets program? What are the things to keep in mind?
I think we touched on it already, and the advice was given to me from a colleague over in Germany. Tag selection is critical, right? So ensuring that you have the right tags, the right technology, tailoring that to the needs of the business ahead of time, so that when you get into the implementation phase, you're ready to rock and roll, so to speak.
Really helpful to get that perspective. And again, I think you've hinted at this a few times, Brian. This is really fresh. This project is up and running, and you're really starting to see the outcomes of this. This isn't something that's a year old. This is something that's very new for your business.
Yep. We've been working on it for a few years, and a lot of these assets, like I said, this is a program that has existed for some time. But yes, as far as the implementation phase, we're very new to this.
John, the insights from Brian directly from a customer are important. As the audience listens and thinks about getting started on a project like this, what are important key first steps when you start to think about a returnable asset tracking program?
I think the important key first steps is really to map out what the vision looks like, right? So what do I want to get to ultimately? And then build not only a business case, but build out a technology solution that will support that. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to turn it all on day one, right? And we've talked about this boiling the ocean concept, which normally doesn't work. Now, when we worked with Brian and his team, they had the full vision of saying, okay, I need a integrated solution which will talk back to my SAP environment, which will track my assets in and out of different locations. And we actually, iterated through a couple of different solutions before we wound up on the final solution that we have in place now. And I think talking through that, keeping the end goal in mind, and looking at, your primary drivers, which in this case was fleet sizing and managing dwell time and ensuring that I had assets returned and were balanced across my network. Those were the initial goals. And then from that, we're going to get additional benefits, right? So labor savings and cost savings and all of those types of things. But really having, the vision, being able to buy into the vision, and then putting in the technology to support that so that you can grow with the solution, I think is key. So we don't look at, and we didn't look at with Brian and his team, we didn't do a pilot. We did an initial implementation that drove some success early, and then we were able to build on that. And that's the way I think you need to do that, because we all know that, if you put in a shortcut pilot, what you wind up with is a suboptimal solution that may or may not get improved upon as you go forward. So that's how I thought about it with the team. We had a great team, working with Brian's team, who was also very enthusiastic, which was super helpful. All of the stakeholders were involved as well. So we did not really hit any roadblocks on the IT side. We did not really hit any roadblocks on the operations side. And everyone was aligned, and it was communicated what the benefits and the expectation was, which was another, very important topic that I think you need to look at in order to make a project successful.
It's always great when we talk about those best practices and learnings. And it's also great when we get questions from our audience. So I want to close out today with an audience question for both of you. Getting the users involved in this and getting them bought in to participating in this project is important to any IT project, not just returnable assets or supply chain. Can you share any lessons out of this project from onboarding and getting going that would be useful to the audience, either Brian or John?
Sure, I can. I think John touched on it, having the right players on the team, right? And I mentioned onboard warehouse, our third-party warehouse. I have never worked on a project where two of our partners have collaborated to the extent that we did here. Again, John mentioned buy-in, and the buy-in was there. And I think one of the reasons the buy-in was there as it related to the onboarding process was we incorporated it as best we could into existing processes. So these assets are coming back, they're being remediated. It was a clearly spelled out process that Peter for Access really supported us in greatly, where he was able to hand it off and say, hey, this is what we need to do. Everyone understood why we were doing it. And the same downstream with the ops team there at Fayetteville, just working with the operators to make this seamless, make sure everyone understood the value of it, and making it as easy as possible. It's going to be hard work, no matter how you set it up. But I think that was the reason we saw the success that we did. Good partners, good communication, and incorporating the onboarding into existing processes.
Brian, you said it. I've been around the IT industry for, well, way too long to mention, 30 plus years. And good communication and great partners have always been the hallmarks of IT projects, irrespective of the type of technology that's involved. And I think that's a good way to wrap it up. That's good insight directly from the mouth of a customer, someone who's just done this project. Brian, we're really grateful to you and the folks at your company for letting us get some insight to this project. Thank you so much for being on the program with us today.
It's been great. Thanks, guys.
So there is a good case study document available about Asset Track. It has a lot of details about the work that was done at Brian's company, even though the case study itself is anonymized to keep the company's details proprietary. But the document is great if you're interested in returnable asset tracking solutions. Access calls them Asset Track. You can get a copy of that case study just by putting your name and email address right into the comments section on this LinkedIn program. And if you happen to be watching the replay, we'll continue to keep an eye on that. We're happy to send you over the case study. John, as always, great to talk about this topic. So many lessons learned here. Thanks again for your partnership and for being on the program today.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. It's good to see you. And Brian, thank you very much.
I know John and the team from Axis and Antares Group is going to be at PAC Expo coming up on the 29th of September in Las Vegas. So if you're heading to that event, please stop by and see John and the team. I don't believe Brian's going to be there, but I know some of the Kuraray folks are going to be at PAC Expo. So we'll look forward to that occurring. And again, our thanks to both Brian and John for being on the program. If you'd like to reach out to John and the great team at Access or the Antares Vision Group, you can use their LinkedIn accounts. It's a great way to follow the kinds of topics that John often talks about in his role as a chief strategy officer. And there you can also find more information about the Diamine family of supply chain solutions on the Access website. My thanks, as always, to the great team at Antares Vision Group for bringing us today's program. And for that team and for Brian and John, I'm your host, Bill Wall. Please join the conversation online. Share the recording of this program with your colleagues, which will be posted on LinkedIn. And until next time, wishing you all a good day.